This is the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission special meeting of Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. And I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everyone would please stand. Ready to begin? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If our recording secretary would please call the roll.
Commissioner DeVrend? Here. Commissioner Weeks?
Present.
Thank you. Chair Lubacek?
Present.
Thank you. Vice Chair Maharo?
Present.
Thank you. And then Commissioner Urena?
Present.
Thank you.
Tonight's meeting is live streamed on cable channel 3 and on our online platforms. To prevent any overlaps in comments, each commissioner will be called upon to speak. The first item on our agenda is public comment. This is the time set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission on items of interest that are not on the agenda but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the commission cannot answer any questions or take any action until such time as the matter may appear as an item on a future agenda. If you wish to address the commission, please fill out a speaker card that is available on the back table. Once completed, kindly submit the card to the recording secretary. Speakers will be called to the podium one by one. Each speaker will be given up to 3 minutes to speak. Have we received any public comment for tonight's meeting?
No public comment at this time, Madam Chair.
All right, then I will close public comment and move on to approval of the minutes. These are the minutes from the June 12th, 2024 HP-CRC meeting. I'm going to be looking for approval, but before I do that, are there any comments on the minutes? Commissioner DeVrend? No. Commissioner Weeks? No. Commissioner Urena?
No comment?
And Vice Chair Moharo? No comment. All right, so I'd be looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
I motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Urena, and a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. Commissioner DeVrend, so do a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner DeVrend?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Weeks?
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Maharo?
Aye.
Commissioner Urena?
Aye.
And Chair Lubacek?
Aye.
5 ayes, motion passes.
Thank you. That brings us to the third item on this evening's agenda, which is the citywide Draft Historic Resources Survey Report, Phase 2. And I believe we're getting a presentation from Andrew Goodrich.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the commission, as Andrew gets settled in, staff does want to mention that this is a discussion item this evening, so no action is required of the commission, just to provide as much feedback to Andrew as possible this evening.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Happy New Year and happy Lunar New Year. So I'm Andrew Goodrich with ARG. I'm really pleased to be here tonight to share the draft findings of the phase 2 of the Citywide Historic Resources Survey. So before I get started, I just wanted to provide a very quick refresher on how the survey was phased. Phase 1 included a reconnaissance survey of the entire city and an intensive survey of individually eligible properties and non-parcel resources. Those findings have been adopted. Phase 2, which is what we'll discuss tonight, includes an intensive survey of districts, which includes a complete evaluation of each district and identification of contributing and non-contributing properties. Phase 2 is what we'll be talking about this evening. All right, so I thought it would be helpful to start. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about our approach, our methodology, and how we went about doing this. So our first step, I guess we started with the phase 1 survey findings, in which we had some very preliminary ideas of what the districts were, where they were located, and why they might be significant. Our first step for phase 2 was to take that information and conduct additional background research into each district. For phase 2, we were able to dig much deeper into the research as it relates to districts. Our team at ARG conducted very focused research into each potential district to learn more about its origins and developmental history. To that end, we consulted a variety of research materials, including historic tract and zoning maps, historic aerial images, which helped us understand development patterns over time, and building permit records, which provided more detailed, more granular information about particular properties. Newspaper archives were also a very valuable source of information for us. Developers, of course, wanted maximum exposure and would often put out very prominent advertisements and articles in local newspapers about their subdivisions to attract potential buyers, which is very helpful for us when we're trying to research what these places are all about. You'll see on the screen, these are just some snippets of newspaper articles that we found, and there are some words that are circled, and I just wanted to call attention to one of the weird kind of quirks that we came across when doing the newspaper research for this project was that in many cases, subdivisions that are located entirely within the San Gabriel city limits were often noted in these newspaper articles and advertisements as being located in neighboring cities like Alhambra and San Marino. Reading between the lines, you know, I suspect that at the time, really in the 1920s, 30s, and into the 40s, places like San Marino and Alhambra perhaps had more prestige and cachet than San Gabriel did at that time. And so those are the names that developers would latch onto and reference in order to attract potential buyers and get the most bang for their buck. It made researching some of these districts challenging at times, but it was a fun challenge, I will admit. It's the kind of research I really like to get deep into. It's kind of like detective work in a way sometimes, and we were able to piece it all together in the end. So after finishing the research, our team went back out into the field to conduct an intensive survey of each district. We did this kind of during the summer months and into the fall months of 2024. To do this, we collected field data on tablets using a mobile documentation app called Fulcrum. What we did was we walked every street in every district. We looked at every property, and we collected data about each individual property, including its architectural style, year of construction, architectural features, and visible alterations. We also took note of kind of more general features like street lighting and street trees, circulation patterns, and other site and subdivision features that are found throughout each district and contribute to its distinct sense of place. I always emphasize this, and I'll do so one more time, but survey data was collected entirely from the public right-of-way. We did not step on private property at all. We did not go inside of buildings. We get that question a lot, so I just like to throw it out there. It's really what you can see from the public right-of-way, and that has to do with really the public benefit of preservation and historic districts. I wanted to also share what we see on our end when we do our field work and conduct these surveys, just to kind of give a visual sense of how we do this. So pictured on the screen are a couple of screenshots of the Fulcrum interface. That's the program that we use in the field. So we start by looking at a geo-referenced map of each district, which is what you see on the left side. Each dot on the map represents an individual property within the district boundary. And when we click on a dot, it brings us to data fields that we're able to populate, and that's what you see on the right. The data fields have been customized so that they directly correspond to the fields that are used to populate DPR forms. And this really helps us streamline the data collection process. It helps speed everything up, and it ensures that data is collected in a consistent manner kind of across the entire project. Also, as part of the documentation process, each property was classified as either a district contributor or a district non-contributor. Contributors are properties that were built within the district's primary period of historical development, which is what we call the period of significance, and they retain historic integrity. A property can often have some alterations and still be a contributor, so long as the alterations haven't significantly impacted the original design. Non-contributors, by contrast, either post-date the period of significance, so this would be like if a district was built really in the 1920s and 30s, and there was a house from the 1990s that's be a non-contributor, or they do not retain historic integrity due to extensive alterations. Common examples of extensive alterations include large additions, the replacement of original wall cladding with an incompatible material that really changes how it's perceived from the street. So a common example is if a building is clad with brick or wood, something with a lot of dimension, and then it's kind of ripped off and put like stucco, that's usually not great. Or the resizing of original window openings and modification of original fenestration patterns. So again, I thought it might be helpful to show what this looks like and how we distinguish between contributors and non-contributors in the field. So I grabbed a couple of images. These are all from the Mount Vernon Park Historic District that was recorded. The 3 properties on the top row were found to be contributors. You can see they retain most, if not all, of their historic form, massing, and materials. These houses were all built between 1941 and 1942 and still really have that strong sense of time and place. Properties on the bottom row were classified as non-contributors. The property at bottom left has been altered pretty extensively. It still has that 1940, I believe 41 construction date, but it's not really recognizable as such anymore. Excuse me, the property in the middle, the bottom middle, has an upper story addition that overwhelms the original house. And the property at bottom right features non-historic stucco cladding, the removal of original decorative features, and resized windows that, when weighed together, really diminish its historic character. So those are just a few examples of how we make that determination in the field. Here are a few additional images. These ones are from the Rosemont Park Historic District. So again, properties on the top row are representative examples of what we found to be contributors, and properties on the bottom row are representative examples of non-contributors for the same reasons. So that really sums up our approach and our methods. Now I wanted to spend some time talking about the draft survey findings for Phase 2. In total, the survey identified 7 potential historic districts in the city. Collectively, these districts contain a total of 690 properties. They range in size. The districts range in size quite a bit. The smallest was 19 properties, which is the California Street Historic District on the east side of the Country Club. And the largest was Rosemont Park, the Rosemont Park Historic District, which contains 267 properties. So there's quite a range. All 7 districts were preliminarily identified in the Phase 1 survey. We did not identify any new districts as part of this Phase 2 project. All of the districts are predominantly residential in use and consist of visually cohesive single-family neighborhoods that were developed prior to World War II. Geographically, they're all located in the northern portion of San Gabriel, north of Las Tunas Drive. And I know we've talked about this before in previous meetings and then also during the historic context statement development. And it really has to do with the city's historic subdivision and development patterns. That northern portion of the city, which really abutted that streetcar line that went on Las Tunas Drive, developed as kind of more singular units, whereas development elsewhere in the city, and particularly in the southern portion of the city, developed in a more piecemeal manner. In addition to the 7 potential historic districts, the survey identified 3 potential conservation overlay zones. And I'll explain what this means. So in the Phase 1 survey, these were called planning districts, you might recall. But in our conversations with Jen and Sam, when we started Phase 2, we realized that the city's ordinance actually refers to these areas as conservation overlay zones. So we just kind of adjusted our phrasing to make sure that the terms that we use in our survey directly align with the terms used in the ordinance. And integrity is really what distinguishes conservation overlay zones from historic districts. Conservation overlay zones are cohesive areas. They have a sense of place. They have a shared developmental history. But they fall short of that 51% contributing threshold that is required by the city's ordinance to qualify as historic districts. All 3 of the potential conservation overlay zones are located near the geographical center of the city and in and around the Mission area. So there were a few differences between the preliminary assessment of districts in the Phase 1 survey and the more detailed evaluations that were completed during the Phase 2 survey. For Phase 2, we had the benefit of having additional information obtained through research and really detailed field work when it came to districts. So I wanted to go over a few of what these looked like. First, some of the districts have slightly different names than they did before. Typically, this was because additional information was uncovered when we did our background research. For instance, what had been called the Mission, Nostra, and Domingo District in Phase 1 was renamed the Old Mill Vista Historic District in Phase 2, and this was a reflection of the original subdivision name, which was called the Old Mill Vista Tract. This is something new that we discovered during this phase, and that certainly was the case in a few of these districts. Second, in some cases, the district boundaries were adjusted and refined to account for additional information obtained from research and fieldwork. For instance, when we researched what was called the Girona Avenue Historic District as part of Phase 1 and has been renamed the Country Club Crest Historic District in Phase 2, again, because of the subdivision name, we realized that there were additional properties on adjacent blocks that had similar characteristics and were all part of that same tract with a similar development history. So several adjacent blocks were added to that district boundary. And again, this is the case in several of the other districts. Usually it was just adding a couple of properties or removing a couple of properties here and there. I think the Girona Avenue / Country Club Crest was the biggest change. And finally, the Mission District, which had been identified as a potential historic district in the Phase 1 survey, was reclassified as a potential conservation overlay zone in the Phase 2 survey. This is something that actually surprised me when I was out doing the fieldwork and analyzing the data. And this decision was really informed by our fieldwork and our analysis of our survey findings. When we put our boots on the ground and we really started getting into the weeds of documentation, looking at every building, looking at permit histories, trying to piece together alterations that had been kind of made over time, we discovered that many of these buildings were much more altered than we originally realized, and there were a number of parking lots and other things that compromise its integrity. There are other planning tools that certainly could be used for this area. So the conservation overlay zone is certainly one of them. There is a specific plan for the Mission District, their design, kind of guidelines that can be developed. I did want to mention too that a substantial number of individual buildings within this potential conservation overlay zone, like the Mission and City Hall and several of the others, are either designated already or they were identified in the Phase 1 survey as being individually eligible. So we are pretty confident that all of the important pieces have been captured there. So once the fieldwork was completed and we reviewed and analyzed the data, we compiled everything into a draft survey report for Phase 2, which is what is before you tonight. This report includes a detailed discussion of our methodology, as well as detailed information about each potential historic district and potential conservation overlay zone. There are some important materials that are included as appendices to the report. So Appendix A, which is shown on the left side of the screen, includes a detailed list of each district. So within each district, every property is organized by street and address, and it lists each property's contributor status and associated status code. In addition, if a property was identified as a non-contributor, there is a column on the far right side of that table that explains why the determination was made. Appendix B, which is on the right side, includes DPR forms for each district, including a detailed description of the district and evaluation of eligibility against criteria. One thing that is not in the packet before you tonight, but will be in the final deliverable package, is an individual form, a DPR form, a single page for each property within each district. We just wanted to make sure that there weren't any major changes that needed to be made to any of the districts before we generate those forms. But it'll be hopefully an easy place if somebody wanted to find information about their property or about their district. It should be easy to flip through and find that information. So as you can see, we are approaching the end of this project. It's hard to believe, but here we are. So everything that's been presented to you tonight is very much still in draft form. Nothing has been finalized. This is an iterative process and a collaborative process. And we'd love to hear from you and from any interested members of the public about the draft report and draft survey findings. Our next step will be to work with city staff to incorporate feedbacks and comments received, and then produce a final polished revised draft that will then be presented to City Council for final approval. That concludes my presentation. It's a pleasure, as always, to be here. Thank you so much for your time, and I am available to answer any questions and take any comments you have. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This is really actually very fun to read and to see and to walk. I spent some time walking some of these districts looking at houses. We'll start with any comments or questions from our commissioners. Commissioner DeVrent.
I had a couple of questions. A lot of them were answered in here, so that was the changes, what we were looking for between the phase 1 and phase 2 of these. The Mission District overlay surprised me too when I was reading through that. I was and thought, a lot of those buildings must have been changed significantly. You mentioned in there, and is there any way, the buildings I'm assuming are probably the commercial buildings, that those are the ones that were changed, or, okay, so is there anything like the city could do in the future to bring those back to make that a historical district, or some kind of a code or a building code to bring those back into line, I guess, is the question?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, this would probably depend on the will of individual property owners within the districts, but if buildings were restored in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior standards, which is kind of the gold standard that we use for preservation, there could certainly be potential to reevaluate in the future and see if we can get it past that 51% threshold.
What were some of the alterations that you saw? Was it stucco, adding stucco, or it doesn't seem to me when walking down there that it seems like there's been a lot of construction or additions to those. Is it things like that, changing windows? Did you have any of those kinds of findings when you went through what was altered?
Yeah, definitely changing of some of the windows and doors. Several of the buildings have been, the storefronts have been extensively modified. And we discovered this by finding some historic images of kind of various vantage points along the street. And I think what's challenging about the Mission District is a lot of the changes that have been made have changed the appearance of the building, the individual buildings, but they stay true to that kind of mission style. So it's tricky because it looks like it could be historic, but it's not actually historic. So it's kind of it required a lot of digging on our part.
Commissioner Weeks.
I had no questions, but I do want to comment on how much this is developing, and the reorganization of the districts is making a whole lot of sense. And it's just very exciting to see your progress. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Urena.
I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you for your time again and your team's efforts for all of this, and it's exciting to see how it's progressed since I've been here the last few years.
Vice Chair Mahara.
Again, I'd like to thank you. This was pretty fascinating to read through. And thank you for your question. I think some of it has been answered. Some of my questions were answered, but I do have a question regarding, let's say, like I'm looking at trying to see which district it is, which is where the library is, where the Angelino, that track, and I know it's an overlay, but to me, it's such an important part of, obviously, the history of the city. Would you think it's possible that in the future there might be a street even in that area that could be deemed a district?
We really tried with this one because I agree with you. It's when you're there, it's the Central San Gabriel, we call it the Central San Gabriel Conservation Overlay Zone. It definitely has a sense of place. And when you walk those streets, when I walk those streets with my team members, you definitely feel it, and you know that there's history there. And that's so much of the history it relates to kind of cultural history in addition to the buildings themselves. And we tried really hard to look at streets or little sections of it, and it just, when we're dealing with the, what I think are some of the limitations of preservation practice, just generally, it really relates to physical integrity, and we just weren't able to make that work. But we did want to certainly call attention to this area because of its importance, and so we did call it out as a conservation overlay zone. Again, if there were, in the future, if property owners were to restore, I think it's unlikely, but you never know, were to restore properties in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior standards to bring them back to kind of a more historic appearance, it could always be reevaluated. I do remember this area too from the historic context statement, and when we were doing our research again, it just seems so important to the history of the city, not just its architectural and developmental history, but really its cultural and social history as well. So, I know when we were preparing that document, we tried to dedicate a lot of attention and care to that area. So that's, I really wish we could have.
It's appreciated.
made it work,
Your
but-
efforts are really appreciated, and it's unfortunate that it's a difficult task, I know. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, that comes to me, and I would like to go back a little bit to some of the questions that Commissioner DeVrent was asking about the Mission District. And I think really it just kind of comes from that disappointment of, oh, it didn't meet the threshold. And I was hoping I would see something similar to what you had for the districts, or which were the non-contributing buildings. It makes sense in a district that you would give us a map showing us contributors and non-contributors, because that threshold is so key. But when it doesn't meet that, it would be very interesting to know what were the parts of the district that overcame, I guess, the monuments. And so I don't know if that's something that could be made available to us as a commission so that we could better understand some of those changes. I agree completely. You don't want a false historicity in the district, and it really is a place where you can walk through the centuries from the 1800s, 1700s, all the way up to the 2000s. But it would be nice to understand some of that chronology a bit more, if possible. And I guess that also would help us understand the impact of infill going forward. So just to understand some of the chronology as we're looking at potential projects, or as property owners might come in and want to make changes, what is it that we're striving to communicate in that space would be helpful. I was wondering if in the Phase 2 final report, there would be an updated map that contains all of the districts, similar to what we saw in Phase 1, where you had mapped out boundaries on a map of San Gabriel. I didn't see that here, and particularly since the boundaries have changed. And that sort of leads to some of my other questions about how these two phases are presented, because there are name changes to the districts, there are boundary changes. My concern would be that a property owner might look at the Phase 1 and think that they're not in, when in reality, with the changed boundaries in Phase 2, they are in. So how do those two pieces come together?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So with respect to your first question, we have all of our raw data that I think when you look at it altogether, it paints a hopefully clear picture of our decision-making process. So I can certainly work with staff to provide that, just for your reference and for anybody else who's interested. With respect to the Phase 1 and Phase 2 surveys, I think the intent, at least for us, was for Phase 1 to present that really preliminary look, and Phase 2 to provide that more detailed look. And I do understand that there are some differences and adjustments, et cetera, and to somebody who's not deep in the weeds of preservation practice, it might be hard to understand that. So I think ideally, the phase 2 findings with respect to districts would supersede those for phase 1. I'm not entirely sure what the most appropriate process would be for making that clear. I don't know if it's a matter of us going back maybe to the phase 1 report. I don't know if there's opportunity to amend that at all at this point. Just maybe including less detail, just saying here's the districts, and
I'm wondering if even
I'm
a
not sure.
link might suffice. I just think in the world of Google, somebody might search, they might come to the phase 1 and not realize there's a phase 2, and that you would end up in a situation where a property owner is confused by the information. So even a simple link inside of the document, recognizing that there's a phase 2 might resolve some of that
Yeah, okay.
without having to do a revision of,
Right.
and phase 1 is done.
Right. Yeah, procedurally, it seems like it could be tricky. But I think, too, when the goal is for both phases to be kind of combined into a single kind of, I guess, report or document that somebody could look at. So hopefully that distinction is made clear, and especially if we add a link or just some note somewhere that really specifies that or clarifies that the phase 2 findings are what the final decision is with respect to districts.
Thank you. And then I had a question that I may be something for Sam and Jennifer to clarify for us. But when you were talking about the definitions that were used on page 8, and this really has to do with our long attempt to become a certified local government and the revisions to the ordinance. But I thought in my memory we had chosen to adopt planning district because as a commission we thought that it communicated more clearly to residents. Conservation overlay zone sort of requires explanation or reading beyond the phrase. So I'll turn that to Jennifer if you.
Sure, happy to comment on that. And you have it right, Andrew, that you did correct it to the correct language in the ordinance now, and thanks for that. It does present a potential conflict with what was decided by the commission we kind of, the commission kind of liked the concept of planning districts. And so that may be a revision that's taken forward and unchanged. So the question is what to do with it now. And I wonder, maybe it's a staff conversation as to what would be the best mechanism, but possibly as simple as a footnote added or something if this is finalized before the other process moves forward. Maybe you could footnote planning district is also another common term or something. But I don't know, maybe it's a conversation between the three of us.
Thank you.
And then the one last thing that I noticed as I was looking through on the maps is just consistency in the keys. I was very interested in seeing which properties may already be holding Mills Act contract. And so on page 7, that can't be right. That's too early. It was, well, I can send it in an email. I believe it was the Country Club Crest, maybe, or no? I'll find it and send it, but there was one key that had sort of the hashed property saying that it was individually already listed, but there was nothing indicating that in the key. So just making sure that the keys are consistent through the document.
Absolutely. We can double check that, triple check that to make sure that's taken care of.
And then my other questions are really, I think, for Sam. Preservation can cut pretty sharply for people, and there will be some, I think, who are really happy to hear that they're part of a district, and there will be others who think that this is the worst news that they've ever heard in their lives. So I'm curious what type of noticing of the public will be done, and if we might be able to do a wraparound with some good PR and marketing. Hashtag Pasadena, they've done really well with property values and historic districts, but how is the public made aware of these potential districts?
Yes, so currently throughout the process from the context statement to phase 1 to now phase 2, the original list of stakeholders, staff has continued to provide links and notifications regarding all the draft documents and opportunities to review and to provide comments. So the stakeholders have been kept up to date as far as the process. And usually the importance of stakeholders is to help be a resource to communicate and to take to the rest of the community that the document is available for viewing. There is a dedicated webpage to the project and links. It also offers that anybody is welcome to come to City Hall if hard copies are needed as well. But really, the bulk of the outreach will potentially occur after the City Council reviews the draft document, at which point in time, the council will likely provide further direction as to how to really approach each district and how to notify the property owners and what it really means. In the meantime, any projects that have come through that are subject to design review, that require city architect review, that also includes Jennifer's review as well for any historic potential. Those property owners have been notified and provided the information, and to what you have mentioned, some are very excited if there is some potential to either to revert or to make improvements that contribute to the property, whereas other owners, they have this greater plan in mind, and that's kind of now preventing them from doing anything too extreme to their property. So as it is, owners are being notified project to project, and the thoughts have been mixed, but that will be the tentative approach for now, really, to take each district by each district and notifying each property owner. And essentially for the district to actually become a district, there does need to be that vote and to come before the commission. And so this is not the end of this project. There will be a continuation depending on how receptive the areas are to becoming a district and really what that means for future projects.
I think selfishly, I would really love to see us get ahead of the individual at the counter who goes back and tells their neighbors, that big project I was planning now can't happen, and you probably can't do one either. And so I'm wondering if there's a potential to maybe do some Mills Act workshops, just making property owners aware of the Mills Act, particularly if there are already Mills Act properties in the districts. Sometimes having a neighbor who's gone through that process explain what they see as the benefits for them can be a really effective way to build enthusiasm for this. So that was sort of my next thought. And then I'm guessing that for our commission, it won't be until after this has gone before City Council that we can actually sit down and have a discussion about maybe a list of where we would like to start in bringing districts forward.
Yes.
Well, those are my questions. So thank you again, Andrew, so much. These have been wonderful. Did you have some more? Oh, see, please. Yes.
Do you mind?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. This is an opportunity for me as well to give you a couple of comments, Andrew, and we can certainly talk offline as well. But I did want to mention a couple of the more substantive comments at the commission so that the commission members have the opportunity to hear those as well, in case they have additional comments in that direction as well. And one of them is page 8. It's just out, it's in the definition section. You have this section where you describe district contributors and non-contributors and how those are determined, which is wonderfully helpful. And I really appreciate that you include the cumulative impacts of smaller alterations, and how those build up to be major. One thing I would say is it may be helpful to include some of the language that was used in the context statement, where you have it under eligibility considerations. There's some great language in there about changes to massing and roof form, some of the more major big ticket items, and it would be really nice to have that in here as well, just to avoid a confusion maybe by a property owner that's reading one document and not the other. I have found that language very helpful in those project reviews that Sam mentioned. So that would be really great. And then on the following pages, page 10, the list of codes that are used and the OHP definition. I did want to ask maybe just to take another look at that, because I do believe you have 5S1 used on your DPR forms for the districts themselves, and that one's not in there. And then I'm not sure if we have a 6L listed, but anyways, if you could just maybe check that one, make sure they're all in there. I wonder about that 7R. There is one in the table, and it was under construction at the time, right?
Yes.
Was that recent, or do you think there's an opportunity to go back to that and take another look?
We can certainly take another look. That was probably in July or August that we
Okay.
looked at that. So, yeah, we can certainly drive by and see
Okay.
if changes have been made.
That would be so nice
And
if it was
update that.
complete and you could make a
Yeah.
determination. Let me see if there was anything else. I think I noted the same thing that Chair Lubicic did in the table, and I think that's it. So I just wanted to mention this.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the time for public comments. Damien, do we have any public comments?
No public comment at this time, Madam Chair.
All right, so it is 7:10 PM, and the time for public comment on this item is now closed. Are there any further comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I appreciate the discussion on this item, and I look forward to seeing it move forward. Our fourth item on the agenda tonight is staff items.
There are no comments, aside from the fact that this weekend will be the Lunar New Year Festival within the Mission District. So again, it's an opportunity to spend some time in the district and to celebrate the new year. And that's it for staff.
Wonderful, thank you. That brings us to the fifth item on the agenda, commissioner comments and conference meeting reports. Each commissioner may address the commission on matters of general information and/or concern. This is also the time for commissioners to report on conferences and/or meetings they have attended. So I'll start with you, Commissioner DeVrent.
Yeah, actually, I did. I wanted to ask Sam. It's probably more for you. We went to this weekend. Went to an open house for the San Gabriel Valley Habitat for Humanity, and one of the women that I talked to lived here in San Gabriel, and she was kind of talking about the cities that benefit from Habitat for Humanity programs, which is not necessarily always just building a brand new house for somebody, but somebody who is elderly or something like that who can't afford to maintain their home, which sometimes happens in the city as you're walking through. And I guess my question for that was, does San Gabriel have any active Habitat for Humanity projects going on? Is that something that is a process that our citizens know about? And, I guess basically my question is that something that the that the city of San Gabriel engages with the Habitat for Humanity?
Yes, so the city does not have a direct partnership with Habitat for Humanities. However, the city does have a contact, and oftentimes they do reach out to our department to ask if there are any potential projects. One project that was a great opportunity was actually the Hayes House. When it needed repairs, the city engaged them, and not only were they cost-effective for the association, but they were also very sensitive to making sure that they were approaching the repairs and the maintenance very sensitively and preserving all aspects of the Hayes House. So that was a fantastic, I guess, partnership with Habitat and the Hayes House and the Historical Association. But anybody who has interest, they are definitely welcome to reach out to our department. Unfortunately, because it's not a partnership, it's not something that we can really promote, as it's a service that can be, the city as a conduit to that service. However, just to provide contact information, staff will be happy to forward it to anybody who calls into City Hall.
I guess that was my other question, is especially after the devastating fires that we've experienced in the last 3 weeks and things like that people might be thinking, maybe it's time to upgrade some of the things on my home, or but I can't afford to do that. So getting asphalt shingles instead of cedar shingles, or things like that, because frankly, I didn't ever think that in San Gabriel, we would get one of the legitimate warnings, evacuation warnings, right? I mean, I was a little shocked by that on Wednesday morning or something like that. So, I think the events of 3 weeks ago surprised a lot of us. So I digress a little bit. But so if somebody was in the area that needed, who needed help with repairs on their house, they could come to the city, basically, ask them about that, and you'd put them in contact with people like that?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you. That's it for me.
Commissioner Weeks?
No comments from me at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Urena?
No comment and nothing to report.
And Vice Chair Mojado?
To kind of go off on what you were just stating as well, I've noticed, and I think we all noticed with those windstorms, so many trees that were just toppled over. And I'm wondering, is there a plan? I know it's very recent, but if there is a plan for the city to replace some of those trees, because some of those are in these districts. And as old as they may be, it's a void when you drive by and you see that this tree is no longer there, and sometimes it's not even something we even paid attention to. We didn't pay attention to that, but yet driving through when it's no longer there, it is such a void, and it does change the look of some of these streets. So that's one comment. Not sure if the city has.
So far, the city has not had those discussions. The focus right now, and Damien has been processing all the requests and the applications that have been coming in for trees that are imminent dangers to properties and to structures. So the focus really has been trying to assist property owners in going out to the sites, and those are very obvious ones where they really look like they're about to have some property damage. And so the Parks Department has been really focused on just assisting with that, with cleanup at the moment. But just like any other day, the Public Works Department, any owner can reach out to them and just get the address for where there is a potential to plant a new tree. So that is always out there. Anytime the city collects in lieu fees for projects, that is to assist with purchasing trees and landscaping. So that would be the recommendation, to reach out to the Parks Department just to identify any trees that may have fallen down and need replacement. That is a resource.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now I had one more comment. In the minutes from the previous meeting, I believe it was mentioned that there's going to be a San Gabriel Cultural Fest in June 13th. Would you think that'd be, or again, is it too soon, an opportunity to possibly promote some of what we're doing here with our commission? I think it's a vital point. We're making progress as a commission. I think it would be wonderful if we could put that out there. If we had a booth, if there was signage, if we could share some information, whatever it is that we are allowed to share, I think that would be a great opportunity to do that.
Yes, we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
All right, well, I have some things to report back on and some things I hope we could maybe bring to discussion at a future meeting. First, the San Gabriel Historical Association usually holds their big kind of kickoff fundraising meeting in January. That was canceled this month, and instead they asked people to donate for fire relief. However, they are an organization that truly does need those fundraising opportunities, and so their next meeting should be coming up in March, and I would just encourage my fellow commissioners to watch for ways to support our own historical association. And dovetailing on that, the California Historical Society is dissolving. This is one of the longest, oldest historical societies. It is truly a repository for the state. They have a holding of over 600,000 items that speak to the history of California, and quite a lot for San Gabriel. They just are not able to financially continue. The holdings are not going to be lost. They're going to be given to Stanford, so they'll remain available through their library system. However, it really is a loss, and I think reading that, it made me think quite a bit about our own historical association, and the fact that it's referenced so frequently in our surveys as a place where we can get photos and information about the city of San Gabriel. And so I think that it would be wise to build maybe an opportunity once a year for the Historical Association to come and let us know what they're working on so we can be aware, if we could seek out opportunities to highlight something from their holdings, to really make use of that and hopefully build some more relevance. I also just wanted to mention, as I often do, that the California Preservation Foundation holds frequent and regular webinars. There's one that's coming up now about participating in preservation with nonprofits, but it's a really nice opportunity to educate yourself about preservation and the work that is done. And then in terms of maybe some things that we could bring for future discussion, I was asked if I could participate in a visioning for the Mission Playhouse, which I was not able to, so I passed that off to Commissioner DeFront, who then was not able to attend. So we did not have a representative from our commission at the meeting, but I do think one of our responsibilities is to advocate and promote our historic resources, and it might be nice to get a report back from Community Services about what's happening in terms of their visioning and how the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission might be able to assist or partner with them, just to be abreast of what they're thinking for our theater. I also think it might be worthwhile to formally circle back and talk about the task force that's now disbanded for the land acknowledgement statement, because we're not able to to achieve agreement between our tribal representatives. There is not a land acknowledgement statement, but there's a lot that we learned in the process that I think would be very beneficial for the commission going forward, things that we can think about for future projects or just cultural events and celebrations. And then lastly, as Vice Chair Mahara was talking about the trees that came down several years ago, maybe more than a decade ago, the National Park Service created a witness tree protection program. And I think we certainly have witness trees that have witnessed history in San Gabriel. And so that might be a way to help assist with some of the protecting trees, arborists, whatever the case may be, but sort of a fun program, part of the National Park Service. So those were my comments and reports.
Could I add?
Please.
One more item that just came to mind and is triggered by the comment on the trees that were damaged. On our street, we have these antique streetlights, and one of them was toppled over and broke into pieces. So I'm wondering if that's going to be. It might not be the only incident of that happening, but would something like that, which is part of the historical aspect of the entire street, be in for repair and brought back and reinstalled, and with the original type of lens on top, and to kind of continue the whole dynamic of the street?
That's something that that planning staff can discuss with Public Works to make sure that they, I mean, hopefully there's pieces and it's salvageable, and that's something that the city can work on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The Public Works came out right away, and they carefully collected everything. So I'm assuming that it's probably in line for some repair at some point.
Yes, we can provide an update to the commission on those efforts.
Thank you.
All right, if there aren't further comments or conference reports, I will move to adjourn this meeting of the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission meeting at 7:23 to the regular meeting of the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission meeting on March 12th, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. here in Council Chambers at City Hall. Thank you, everyone.